Beatitudes in Matthew, specifically in Matthew 5, which is the first part of the Sermon on the Mount. And this week we are focusing on the merciful. So as we always do, as is our custom, we Google mercy. And this was like, is this blurry or is my contact?
I think it's a little blurry.
Like really bad.
Yeah, it's blurry. There
we
you go.
Oh, dear Jesus, that's better. What happened now?
I think you want to slide forward. There you go.
So when you Google mercy, this is kind of what you see. Surprising,
Teresa.
typical, what you expected. What would you expect?
The one in the middle, up at the top. What I can't.
The Good Samaritan.
The Good Samaritan.
Okay. Yeah, Mother Teresa.
I mean, this one kind of shook me a bit.
Yeah.
I couldn't find where it came from, but it was in a few different spots. Sometimes overtapped, sometimes with these words plastered over it. But I don't know who the artist is. So, but the Good Samaritan, that one is at a whole bunch of different spots, along with the, holding hands.
Yeah.
And so I thought I owed it to you to show you this awesomeness.
One day, an expert in religious law stood up to test Jesus by asking him this question: "Teacher, what should I do to inherit eternal life?" Jesus replied, "What does the law of Moses say? How do you read it?" The man answered, "You must love the Lord your God with all your heart, all your soul, all your strength, and all your mind, and love your neighbor as yourself." "Right," Jesus told him. "Do this and you will live." The man wanted to justify his actions, so he asked Jesus, "And who is my neighbor?" Jesus replied with a story. A Jewish man was traveling on a trip from Jerusalem to Jericho, and he was attacked by bandits. They stripped him of his clothes, beat him up, and left him half dead beside the road. By chance, a priest came along. But when he saw the man lying there, he crossed to the other side of the road and passed him by. A temple assistant walked over and looked at him lying there, but he also passed over on the other side. Then a despised Samaritan came along, and when he saw the man, he felt compassion for him. Going over to him, the Samaritan soothed his wounds with olive oil and wine and bandaged them. Then he put the man on his donkey and took him to an inn, where he took care of him. The next day he handed the innkeeper 2 silver coins, telling him, "Take care of this man. If his bill runs higher than this, I'll pay you the next time I'm here." Now which of these 3 would you say was the neighbor to the man who was attacked by bandits? Jesus asked. The man replied, "The one who showed him mercy." Then Jesus answered, "Yes, now go and do the same."
Jesus wasn't yellow, Jen.
What? Jesus wasn't yellow? Damn it! I told you I nailed it. I knew he wasn't white, but I thought maybe he was yellow. Anyway, I was Googling a bunch of different things, and when I came across this Lego telling of the Good Samaritan, that's a gem.
I feel like we should make this a consistent thing.
What, a Lego?
Find it. There's didn't they do the whole Bible?
Well, they have a Lego Bible, actually,
Yeah.
in book form. But I don't know if you actually have animated it. And if they haven't, then maybe that's what we can do.
Maybe that's what we need to do.
That's what we need to do.
But speaking of animation, as somebody who teaches storytelling, I have to critique this.
They don't have mouths, Tracy. They have no mouths.
I know their joints only move certain ways, but okay, this is not very effective.
You know, it kind of reminds me of when you had what was the Bible, that whole Bible thing, David and Goliath,
Oh, yeah.
It kind of reminds. Remember how they made all the different stories
Yep.
of animation? It kind of I guess is the modern day version.
Oh, it's the Good Samaritan.
Right. Okay. So the Beatitudes from the backside say this about mercy. Believe me, mercy is hard work. For one thing, mercy is an emotional investment. The biblical concept of mercy, William Barclay said, means the ability to get right inside the other person's skin until we can see things with his eyes or her eyes, think things with his mind or her mind, and feel things with his feelings or her feelings. Between you and me, this is the kind of total involvement that most of the time we can't even imagine. And then when we do imagine it, we're likely to avoid it. It's the kind of involvement that the British novelist Charles Williams describes in his novel, Descent into Hell, when he speaks of one literally picking up another person's pain so that it is no longer theirs to carry. When we face the prospect of this kind of involvement, we're less likely to pass judgment on the priest and the Levite in Jesus' story of the Good Samaritan, who chose to pass by on the other side. It's far easier to avoid looking pain in the eye than to invest ourselves in such mercy that we see with the sufferer's eyes and feel with the sufferer's feelings. Mercy involves more than a financial contribution, essential as that is, and more even than a note or a passing visit. It's getting, quote, right inside the other person's skin, unquote. This kind of involvement hurts. Mercy isn't easy. I love it because I think he sums it up like so well right there. I think he sums up a lot of the reason why folks, when we're driving down MLK or we're driving down North Avenue or we're driving or we're walking around and we see someone who's panhandling, why we don't want to make eye contact.
Right.
Are we afraid they're going to beat us and hurt us and kill us? No. I think we're afraid of seeing that hurt and that pain.
Right.
Yeah, I think you're right.
So, getting us into the back into the Greek. This week we are in the word from the verb elios, and we see it when we're looking at it in the Greek in the New Testament. We see it pop up quite a few different times, but when we look at it from the Hebrew, right, like and thinking about how Jesus would have seen or been exposed to it, we see that this word merciful is translated actually from like 4 different Hebrew words, right? So we have our hesed, we have our rachmanin, hanan, and a hus. And they're all kind of translated loosely with this whole mercy or steadfast love or covenant love. Compassion is kind of how we see it, right? So there's Micah 6:8. But all the stories we see and all the stories we hear in this Old Testament or in this First Testament are all of these types of merciful acts of God. And so it's really kind of interesting to hear and see how many times Jesus was exposed to this concept of mercifulness. So going back to this word elios, and how where else we see it in the New Testament. Specifically, you know how I get so excited because it's in Matthew. And I have this philosophy that's yet to be proven, but I'm going to prove it, where Matthew 5-7, his Sermon on the Mount, is echoed throughout Matthew. And so most clearly, we see it here in Matthew 18:21-35. So we normally take it really as being a thing about forgiveness, right? Because it comes right after this whole, how many times do I tell you to forgive? 70 times 7, right? Or 7 times 77. But as we're reading the story with the slave and the king, does someone want to read this for us?
For this reason, the kingdom of heaven may be compared to a king who wished to settle accounts with his slaves. When he began the reckoning, one who owed him 10,000 talents was brought to him. And as he could not pay, his lord ordered him to be sold, together with his wife and children and all his possessions, and payment to be made. So the slave fell on his knees before him, saying, "Have patience with me, and I will pay you everything." And out of pity for him, the lord of that slave released him and forgave him the debt. But that same slave, as he went out, came upon one of his fellow slaves who owed him 100 denarii. And seizing him by the throat, he said, "Pay what you owe." Then his fellow slave fell down and pleaded with him, "Have patience with me, and I will pay you." But he refused. Then he went and threw him into prison until he would pay the debt. When his fellow slaves saw what had happened, they were greatly distressed. And they went and reported to their lord all that had taken place. Then his lord summoned him and said to him, "You wicked slave, I forgave you all that debt because you pleaded with me. Should you not have had mercy on your fellow slave as I had mercy on you?" And in anger, his lord handed him over to be tortured until he would pay his entire debt. So my heavenly Father will also do to every one of you if you do not forgive your brother or sister from your heart.
Right. Always those like ending words are always just like sum it up so nicely. Oh no. Yes.
Christine says she's here and she's lurking after CPE
I love it.
and she's all tapped out, but she's listening.
Good, I'm glad. So here's some words from Gregory Strong. So we have this whole theme of 9 blessed beads, and so we're encouraging people through social media to share their wisdom, their learnings about these beatitudes, and then always just using the hashtag 9 blessed beads. So Gregory Strong posted this this afternoon. Mercy, compassion or forgiveness shown towards someone whom it is within one's power to punish or harm. Like perfect with what we just read in Matthew 18, right? Happy are the people who share mercy because they will receive mercy, right? Totally fits exactly with what we just kind of read.
Right.
And then, as I was Googling, I came across this video from The Verge, of the Verge conference, more of a conservative group. But anyway, I'll show it to you and then we can chat about it. So here it is. Don't get spooked out.
Are you merciful? Why? Because Jesus healed the sick. Because Jesus fed the multitudes. Because Jesus gave legs to the crippled. Because Jesus granted sight to the blind. Because Jesus opened the ears of the deaf. Because Jesus found prostitutes and tax collectors and drew them into the sphere of his love. Because Jesus touched the untouchable and loved the unlovable and forgave the unforgivable and welcomed the undesirable. Because Jesus even now saves the otherwise unsavable. Why? Because they deserve it? When the goodness and loving kindness of God our Savior appeared, he saved us, not because of works done in righteousness, not because we met him halfway, not because we took the proper steps forward and in good faith have elevated ourselves to the place of the deserving poor, but according to his mercy. We are here because Jesus Christ didn't say with cold indifference, give them what they deserve. They brought it on themselves. Jesus Christ is the mercy of God. And seeing us in our misery and need, he doesn't just feel for us. He takes the necessary action to relieve our distress. He leaves the eternal glory of heaven and the perfect fellowship of the Trinity. He condescends to us, lives among us, suffers like us, dies for us. Do you understand this? Have you experienced this? How then is it possible to experience it and not display it? It isn't possible. You haven't experienced it if you don't display it. The evidence of God's mercy in your life isn't determined by how much theology you know, by how many books you read, but by your active goodness to people in misery and in need. Blessed are the merciful, for they
How is he yelling at us?
Well, right. That's one of the things. But the whole
I have so many thoughts.
Right, so let's the thoughts. My thought is I'm fucking exhausted. Like watching that exhausted me. And I think being merciful can and is exhausting.
Yeah.
And so it goes back to what we had talked about a couple of weeks ago. I don't know if it was Bible study, if it was here, and we talked about compassion fatigue.
Yeah.
Right? So one place listed as indifference to charitable appeals on behalf of those who are suffering, experience as a result of the frequency or number of such appeals.
Yeah.
Right? So that could be even, those appeals could even be the people that you see walking down the street. Right? The homeless that are asking you yet for another $1. The homeless that are asking you for a Lucy, which is just a single cigarette. The homeless that are asking, or the folks that are asking you to wash their window so that you can have a clean window. Any of that. See Figly, 1995. We have not been directly exposed to the trauma scene, but we hear this story told with such intensity, or we hear similar stories so often, or we have the gift and curse of extreme empathy, and we suffer. We feel the feelings of our clients, we experience their fears, we dream their dreams, and eventually we lose a certain spark of optimism, humor, and hope. We tire. We aren't sick, but we aren't ourselves. Thought that was a really great pointing back to the compassion fatigue, which is what he was addressing. Compassion fatigue, also called vicarious traumatization or secondary traumatization, the emotional residue or strain of exposure to working with those suffering from the consequences of traumatic events. It differs from burnout, but can coexist. Compassion fatigue can occur due to exposure on one case or can be due to a cumulative level of trauma. My biggest argument is that every single person in Baltimore City experiences or has experienced trauma. And so I think to say that we suffer from compassion fatigue is an underestimate of what we see and what we experience. And I worry that our kids not only are experiencing trauma, but those of their friends are experiencing compassion fatigue as well from hearing those stories and reliving those stories day in and day out. And that the kids who are experiencing these traumas don't even have a place to even share these stories that are safe anymore, because I worry that who they're sharing them with aren't even empathetic enough to even fully listen to the stories. Okay. Mother Teresa and her understanding of compassion fatigue. So she wrote in her plan to her superiors that it was mandatory for her nuns to take an entire year off from their duties every 4 to 5 years to allow them to heal from the effects of their caregiving work. I love that she said 4 to 5 years. Like, so in pastoral ministry, we do this 7-year sabbatical thing, and I guess probably because the Bible is, 7 is that year of completion, blah, blah, blah. But what do we see from Jesus? Don't you love these pictures of Jesus? He's not white Jesus, he's not yellow. Aren't you proud of him?
White Jesus sitting on a beach.
Right? White Jesus. He doesn't take off. In his 3 years of ministry, how many times did we see him go off by himself?
Several.
Constantly.
Compassion fatigue. He had people always biting at him, wanting something from him. He knew it. He knew that this was a real issue that could really happen. Who is that? Is that Poppy? Is it locked?
Come on in.
Hey! Here's the pocket connection that we hadn't seen in forever.
There's lots of food. Here, clean plate.
Lots of food. Lots of food. Here's a plate. We got the
Yo, give me some love. Good to see you. Oh, nice to see you.
All the time.
Come on in.
What can we get for you? Everything's probably needs to be warmed up.
You tell us if it's warm enough. enough, and if it's not, we'll stick a plate in and heat it up for you. Poppy, this is Jill.
Right here.
Jill?
Yeah, Tracy.
So I wonder what it is that we need to do to battle our own, or prevent our own compassion fatigue. And then what is it that we're called to do to help those around us as well? What are your thoughts? Have any thoughts? I have lots of thoughts.
Compassion fatigue is not as bad as the actual trauma that people are going through.
Right.
So
Definitely.
we can't ever put them on the same playing field.
Right.
So that's I think that's important to say because and I think it's also important to point out that it's fatigue mostly because you're under-resourced, I think, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
I do think that if people were like if there were more people giving, that there would be less fatigue. So like, resources and people, and so I think there's a whole thing around helping people, like the bystander syndrome, that I think that we should also talk about, which I think is related to compassion fatigue because other people don't help out. Okay, so I recently had to look up what this meant because I didn't know what it meant. It's called bystander syndrome, and so I don't know how many you probably don't know, but I witnessed a really traumatic car accident where this car caught fire and this guy came stumbling out and just kind of stood next to his burning car, and I pulled him away from the car, and literally nobody else stopped. Like I was the only person who stopped. This car is literally in flames on the side of the road, no emergency vehicles, just me and this guy, and nobody stopped. And I guess the bystander syndrome is that people just, if they think that there's enough help being given, they won't stop or something like that. It's this complicated psychological theory. But I think that it's important not to ignore that a lot of people get burnt out way quicker with compassion fatigue because other people are not helping out. They're just not doing it. They're not pulling their weight at all.
Well, on a lesser level, you have, and Jen, you work in a church. I mean, you know this. It's like the 80-20 rule. Right. 20% of the people do 80% of the work, and that's why they get burnt out, right?
Right.
Because it's not an even sort of sharing of the load.
Right.
So same kind of thing.
Yeah.
So I would say, it'd be interesting if somebody did a study if the 80-20 rule works or applies to life in general, the same kind of thing. And in your case, it was even less than 20, but
it was far, far less.
Or they thought that the help they could offer would be the real quick calling of 911.
Yeah.
The real quick passing of the buck. The real quick without the relationship, right? So I think that's the whole thing about Blessed are the Merciful, is that in order to do what William Barclay says, back here, right? The ability to get right inside the other person's skin until we can see things with his or her eyes, think things with his or her mind, and feel things with his or her feelings. In order to be able to actually truly do that, you need to be in a relationship with the person. You have to know them. It's not just passing them a buck or calling 911. You really have to be in it and know it.
Right.
And that's when it kind of goes with all of these, with with Jesus, right? Is he's flipping the whole thing upside down, right? He's all about the relationship type thing. It's not just quickly get the works done. It's about building that relationship.
Right.
But that's
Hard work too.
Oh, the relationship?
I mean,
Oh, totally.
and again, so sometimes it's just easier to like, I don't, you know.
I mean, you can get fatigued from that too.
Oh,
Yeah.
yes, you can.
I mean, even the best of relationships are hard work.
Hard work.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Planning of the wedding is the easy part. The marriage, that's the hard work right there.
Right. Right.